Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Fit Chicks Chat. My name is Laura Jackson.
And I'm Amanda Quinn.
And on today's episode, we are talking about holistic nutrition after 40, what we wish we knew earlier. So I wanted to start off by saying is that even if you are not in your 40s or after 40, so I am currently 44, Amanda's 45, even though the other day someone asked me how old I was, and I was like, I think I'm 43, and I don't even
I thought
know.
I was 46.
Yeah, like,
I had no idea. It actually happens. As you start getting older, you forget, you have no idea. I swear to you, I was like, I think
yeah.
I'm 46. And then I was
But
like, I
even
don't
if
know.
you are listening and you're in your 20s or your 30s, you're like, oh, I don't want to know. I'm not after 40. I think this episode is really actually important, more important for you because there are things that I truly wish that I had known earlier and focus on earlier as I was transitioning into, and even still, I'm still transitioning, obviously. We're going to talk about that. But like, as we transition through into our 40s and 50s, so much changes, especially for women, and we don't talk about it. And especially when you're in your 20s and 30s, I never had these conversations, right? And even I'm in the
No,
holistic nutrition world, and so much of it was brand new to me as I started to do more research. It was never just welcome, like, or openly talked about. So I think it's really important
it's
to
the
understand that.
preventative
And
measures. I can't hear you.
okay, so let's get into this. So one of the first things that about holistic nutrition after 40 that I wish I would have known earlier is about the changes in metabolism. So
Yeah.
I know for me, like, it's funny. I should say it's funny, but I know for me, it wasn't
Interesting.
like, it was interesting. I did find that as I started to age, and it wasn't like I suddenly hit 40 and just, that age change on the calendar and then your metabolism slows down. It's not like that. But obviously, as you start to get older, and I found this into my 40s, I couldn't bounce back the way I used to if I was not being active with my habits, really focusing on my nutrition and things like that. Like I would suddenly feel like I would be gaining weight easier after the holidays. Like I know before when I was younger, it would be like, oh, the holidays would be, more food, more non-nutritionally dense foods that I wouldn't normally eat, less exercise, you're traveling, all the things. But then I would find, within a couple weeks after into the New Year's, when I went back to my regular habits, then I would feel, you know, back to normal and it wouldn't be that big. Now I find that if I'm not consistent, I find that after the holidays, I feel like it's still into February, I'm still kind of paying the price. I'm bloated. I'm not feeling as good. I feel like I've gained more weight than I would have. Um, and it just definitely is something that for me has been interesting as especially over the last 3 years, which yeah would be like 41, 42, 43. So
Yeah.
I know for a lot of people, they'll say, and again, like I've been active in my health journey for such a long time, but I'll have a lot of clients or students that will say, in my 20s or my 30s, I could eat anything and I wouldn't gain any weight. And then now suddenly I'm in my 40s and I am gaining weight. So that was something that, again, if you didn't already have some things in place, that's kind of a really obvious sign for you. Like your metabolism does change. We don't bounce back as easy. Now, I don't want to say that that is though, you know, for everybody, but it is something that there are shifts that happen as we get older.
I think for me, my biggest thing wasn't necessarily like holidays and stuff because holidays I've always been still pretty consistent because it doesn't I don't know. I don't like sweets and things like that, and I find that usually at holidays and stuff like that, it's a lot of, like, sweets and stuff, and I don't really care for that kind of stuff as much. But for me, it's the nighttime snacking. That was, like, because that's, like, my jam when I was in my 20s. Like, I always, like every night, my habit was to have some sort of a snack at nighttime, always, like, hands down, and it never really affected me that much. And now I look at, if I get into for a while, I was actually really into like nighttime snacking again. And I noticed like a massive difference in terms of my overall health, in terms of my metabolism, in terms of just everything. And so now I have set sort of the rule where, I don't nighttime snack anymore if I'm watching a show or something. I just don't. And it's really just about creating a new habit. Like it's really just about like taking that old habit and making a decision to create a new habit. But I noticed that that was such a big thing for me. So if you're someone if you are someone who is like in your 20s or 30s, it's like, okay, can we find a different habit? Because it's a hard habit to break.
Hmm.
It's not impossible, but it is something that's hard to break, especially if you do it like I always did it when I'd be like watching a show, eating chips. That was my thing, or rice cakes or things like that. Like those were my things that I loved to eat while I was watching a show. And it's so easy to just eat all of it or eat a lot of it during that moment because you're not really paying attention. You're just mindlessly snacking. You're enjoying life, watching your shows, doing these things. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I ate this whole bag of rice cakes or I ate this whole bag of chips or whatever it is. And for me, that was probably my biggest thing was like recognizing that that habit no longer was something that if my goal was to be able to maintain or to either lose weight at that point, it was lose weight, but also to maintain that nighttime snacking is just not something that is conducive to that goal. It doesn't help me, it only hinders me.
The thing is too, right, is because we also start to process things differently as we get older. So
Mhm.
let's just talk about though, like, why does metabolism slow down? So there's a lot of reasons, right? Our hormones are changing, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't realize is after the age of 35, we start to naturally lose more muscle mass, right? It's more challenging for us to hold on to muscle mass. And muscle mass is a key piece of an efficient metabolism. The more muscle mass we have, the quicker or the more we burn, right? They go hand in hand. So if we're not focusing on certain habits, or we're not focusing on maintaining muscle mass, then as that slow progression of muscle mass decreasing, so if we're not lifting weights and we're not actively using our muscles and our muscle mass is slowly going down, and it's not overnight, right? We don't just see suddenly like, hey, I've lost half my muscle mass.
Yeah.
Over the years, right, our metabolism, what it needed to like the amount of calories that needed to maintain our current body weight, that amount decreases, but we're still eating the same and we're still consuming the same and wondering why, because again, it's slowing down because that decrease in muscle mass. So one of the
Mhm.
biggest things that I wish I knew earlier, and again, I have been practicing this for a long time, so I've really seen the benefits of this, but it's a simple habit, is just to focus on protein. Really focus on making sure you're getting protein at every single meal. Something we talk a lot about at Fit Chicks Academy with the complete and three rule, but so many people still don't consume enough protein. And especially when we're looking at metabolism, right?
Mhm.
I wish I knew that after the age of 35, it's not, again, we're not
It's
seeing
not a
this so
fixated amount
quickly,
of
but
age. Mhm.
it starts to slow down, like it starts to break down, our muscle mass decreases. So again, we've got to focus on maintaining it, but having high quality protein with every single meal is really going to help to preserve that muscle mass. And then of course, in turn, keep our metabolism working more efficiently. So that for
Mhm.
me is something that was a big, I wish, again, I would have known that in my 20s and my 30s, and anyone in their 40s who are suddenly like, I'm gaining weight, nothing's working as much. Really focus on maintaining that muscle mass, which is going to keep your metabolism up.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. Definitely, yeah, the protein and adding strength training or maintaining your strength training routines. If you're someone who's already strength training, if not, start adding in the strength training as well so that you can continue to like maintain your muscle or begin to build muscle
yeah,
to be able to support that as well.
we talk a lot about this in all of our certifications,
Mhm.
because it's so important, especially for women. So the next thing I wish I knew earlier, let's talk about some hormones, because again, 20s, 30s, we didn't really talk about hormones. Most of the stuff we were
I think
talking
even
about,
like 5 years ago, people didn't
no.
really talk about hormones at all. Like hormones was just like this, it was just a nothing, right? It wasn't really a conversation that was being had openly. And I think now there's like this massive shift that's happening. At least that's what I get inundated with. And I don't know if it's just like the
No, but I think
algorithms
it's
are
the
feeding
age
me
we're
the
at.
thing.
Yeah.
I think so, but it's so interesting, right? Because but now it's being talked about consistently and it's so open to talk about hormones, which is such a good thing because if you don't know what you don't know, and if no one is talking about it, then you'll never actually understand how much of an impact it can have on you.
Well, and the thing is too, is not just the hormones. What I wish I knew earlier was about all of the hormones that are involved, right? when we think of hormones, again, if you were to ask 5 people, 5 women, let's say, when I say the word hormones, what do you think of? They're probably going to say, depending on their age, different things, right? They might be saying, I think of hot flashes. I think of moodiness. I think of menopause. I think of perimenopause. I think of my period, right? Like it could be all different things depending on where you are in life. But the one thing that I didn't realize was, first of all, how many hormones were involved in the way we feel and, managing our weight, managing our health. So there are the female sex hormones, right? Which again, as we're aging, they're changing. So that's estrogen and progesterone. And as we head into perimenopause, the balance of these are shifting. We're starting to see, more changes in our body, irregular periods, suddenly maybe weight gain, bloating. We're not sleeping anymore, like things that just feel like they're coming out of nowhere. And again, if you're 20s and your 30s, you might be thinking like, what? How does that just come out of nowhere? We've talked about this a lot on our podcast, which is why we even developed our certification around this too. It's like we've had friends who have said to me, like, I feel like overnight my body changed. My skin got really greasy. I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm gaining weight, right? Because of those hormones and those fluctuations as you head into perimenopause, they can be all over the place and so different for everybody. But the other thing too that I think a lot of people, don't know about is the importance of the hormones like insulin, right? We always talk about that in regards to diabetes, or pre-diabetic. We talk about insulin resistance and things like that. But keeping your insulin balanced, and especially if we're using things like nutrition and lifestyle techniques, it's so important because, again, as you age, as those other female sex hormones start to change, those hormones are impacted by the female sex hormones changing too. So they become less efficient if we're not focusing on it. And then it also is the hormones of cortisol, which is our stress hormones, which again, as female hormones change, that's impacted. But also as you age, you're typically heading into more stressful times in your life. You might have children, you might have elderly parents you're taking care of at the same time. Usually in your 40s, 50s is the peak of your career, right? So you're having all these stressors that you didn't have earlier on. So I just really wish I would have known about all of those hormones and like that, what happens to them through the seasons and the stages. And then I also wish I knew how much nutrition can help to balance them and support those hormones. So, making sure you're getting, again, that adequate protein, you're making sure you're getting all of those healthy fats, those omega-3s from like fatty fish, flax seeds, chia seeds, and really focusing on those because, again, those support hormone production, but then also on things like learning self-care techniques and stress management. Because as you build those tools, they really help you to navigate as your body's completely changing. So that's something I really wish that I would have known more about before I turned 40.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if there's anyone listening to who feels like, oh my gosh, my hormones are definitely like a little wacky right now, they're like kind of, just know that it's never too late to be able to get them sorted, right? Like it's never too late, no matter where you're at on your own health journey, no matter what age you're at. If you're in your 50s, if you're in your 60s and you're listening, you can still be proactive with learning how to balance those things. So it's never too late to be able to begin that process. Even if you're postmenopause, you can still, your hormones are still they're still shifting, changing, and evolving. So you need to be able to just, proactively look at how can I support my hormones in the best way possible so that I feel the best throughout the rest of my entire life, right? Like that, and that's the whole purpose of it, is be able to balance everything so that you have a balanced state, so your body feels good and strong and healthy and maintains that for the rest of your life, as opposed to, but definitely they do make a massive shift as soon as, I think for me, it was probably around 2 years ago is when I started recognizing it. And maybe even actually earlier than that. Actually, I take that back. It was a few years before that I noticed such a big shift in my hormones. It was when we were trying to have a second baby and how hard it was and how challenging it was and all of those things, because it was a bit later in life, and just how much when we actually checked my hormones, how low my progesterone was and how high my estrogen and all of these things was such a huge eye opener for me.
Totally. Hormones are a wacky world.
They are. I know, that's why
Dr.
I said if they're
Cheryl,
all
who's one of our
wacky.
instructors, she always says it's like hormones are like a symphony. If one of them is playing out of tune, it messes up the whole song, right? So it's really also because there's so many different ones. And again, that goes back to what I said about, understanding the role they all play. It really makes a difference. So the third thing I wish I knew about holistic nutrition after 40, and I wish I knew this earlier, was sleep, the importance of sleep. So I am such a big advocate for sleep. And I've been lucky because I've always been a really good sleeper. However, I used to be one of these people who was like, oh, I could stay up really late. I love staying up late for some reason. I'm like a night owl. It was my alone time, whatever. And I'm like, oh, I can live off 5 to 6 hours of sleep and still be functional. And I could. And now if I have multiple nights of 5 hours of sleep, I am a complete disaster.
Yeah.
When it comes to my moods, when it comes to my cravings, my snacking, my skin, even I could feel it in my body.
Brain fog, the like
Brain fog,
heaviness of your body, your
all of it.
energy. Oh my God. I get now when I don't have like, we just went away, you and I, we had a meeting, we were away, and I had slept like over a 72-hour window. I think I got like 11 hours sleep, like very
Yeah,
minimal
I was
sleep over a
so
few
exhausted for
days.
like a week.
I was so tired, and we were at this meeting and I could feel myself nodding off. Like I was like, I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can stay awake. Like it physically was just overwhelming me, and like I couldn't focus. And I get dizzy spells now and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not worth it. Like staying up to watch the extra episode, I promise you, is not worth it
No.
in the long run, in the grand scheme of things and how much it can affect you. It's totally not worth it. I used to do it all the time. I still do it sometimes. I try not to. And whenever I do, I always pay the price, but it takes me like a few days to like regroup after it.
Well, and sleep too, it's so important to what we just talked about with the hormones. Like that is one thing.
Totally.
Like I always say to clients, the first thing, or to students, the first thing we look at too before we're changing nutrition is how are people sleeping? Because if you are not getting enough sleep, you're not balancing hormones, you're not repairing your muscles, you're not, it's the time that your body rejuvenates and repairs, right? So even if you are sleeping, but you're not getting good sleep, and I know for some people, it's not available to them. They are wake up constantly during the night. They have really bad sleep. They've always been bad sleepers. So really trying to implement a sleep routine though, is something that can really help to start in that way. So that could mean, not looking at your screens, right before bed and putting them away, making sure your sleep environment is good. So you've got things like, dark blackout curtains, you're not having TV in your room. You have a journal maybe to let go of if you have racing thoughts, making sure the temperature of your room is low, especially as your hormones are changing. A lot of women, as we have these cortisol spikes in the middle of the night, we're waking up completely soaked in sweat. And it just is something that, again, I think if you could start to work on anything and create that pattern earlier on, it's so beneficial, because sleeping is seriously, it's like nutrition and sleep. I'm always like nutrition and sleep, nutrition and sleep. And then of course, strength training.
Nutrition, sleep, and strength training. If you get anything from this podcast, focus on those three things, no matter where you're at in your age or your health journey, for sure.
And then the last thing that I wish that I knew earlier, and I know you do too, is it's about mindset. And I think that there is this whole trap that we fall into, thinking that there's certain things that are normal, quote unquote normal, as a part of getting older. Like we just get older and it's like, of course I'm supposed to, have hot flashes, and of course I'm supposed to gain weight or not be as strong, and my body's supposed to break down. That's so not true. And really now 40, 50, 60 is middle age. Like we're living to be 100. You still have so much life after that. And it's like this idea of, how do I start to having the mindset of how do I set myself up for success as these changes happen, as opposed to accepting or believing that this is what it's supposed to be like. Like I know my nanny, she was even at like 50 years old, like, oh, I just need a break. I need to sit down. She'd be sitting all day. And it's like, that, and then as she aged, she had so many different health problems because she didn't practice the habits. And then when we don't use it, we lose it. I look at my great grandmother, or my grandmother-in-law, my husband's grandmother. And she's 93 and she still swims every day. She plays tennis. She's like totally active because she takes care of her body.
Yeah.
So
I know
I just
it
think that's a
truly is.
huge
It's
thing.
so important. It's such an important piece. It's such an important thing to think about. I was just thinking about this actually the other day because someone that I love is not very active and hasn't been very active. And we were trying to go to the museum and they had to pass. They couldn't join us because the idea of even just walking in the museum was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Which again, I'm not saying this is a negative or a positive, but it's heartbreaking, really, is what it is. And, they had to miss out on a fun activity and a fun opportunity because they just weren't able to do that. And so it's something that we really do need to think about. And I think that goes back to also what I was saying earlier about how the conversation now is like, yes, it's about hormones, but it's also about like longevity, health, overall
Mm-hmm.
well-being. People are talking about these things now. They weren't necessarily focused on it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. People are always focused on health, but for different reasons. I think now is the time, and especially as you go into your 40s, really be thinking about this as how can I think about my health to be as healthy as possible, to be able to sustain and maintain and be around as long as possible, but also be able to maintain the same lifestyle that I envision for myself. And
Well,
that's really what it's about.
and that's the whole thing that I think too. I think there's so many things that we don't think are within our control that are within our control or that we could do that can contribute to us feeling better, living longer, thriving, as opposed to looking at like it's always something outside of us. But that comes with, of course, education too, right? Like really learning about this stuff and understanding how it all works. Like I was saying about the hormones, like really understanding these hormones and what can I do to support them. And there's small shifts that could have huge results. So
Mhm.
that is our podcast for today. Holistic nutrition after 40, what we wish we knew earlier. Hopefully, if you are in your 20s and 30s, these are some things you can get moving on now. And if you are after 40, you can understand what it is within your control. And of course, if you want to dive deeper into all of this, we have our holistic nutrition weight loss coach certification, summer fast track, open for enrollment for a little bit longer. So make sure to check it out at fitchicksacademy.com/HWLC or jump on one of our live info sessions at fitchicksacademy.com/live session. And you can come behind the scenes and learn all about it. Okay, guys, have an amazing day and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.